The ancient Roman philosopher Saint Augustine once said, "What is time? If people do not ask me what it is, I know. If they ask me, then I do not know." In the past few centuries, however, it seems like we have figured out what time is, or at least we figured out that it's measured by the clock. That it is linear, that it flows from second to second, from hour to hour, from day to day, and from year to year. However, not everyone agreed with this mathematical exact definition of time. In fact, there were numerous people among philosophers and writers who strongly disagreed with that concept and tried to figure out what time actually is. This video is dedicated to a brief overview of such attempts during the past century. Without further ado, let's get started with the first way of subverting time. If you were to live in a traditional rural society, you would see that people there live not so much by the rules of linear time, but by the rules of circular time. Their entire lives and activities depend on the season because everything revolves around the time when food can be planted and harvested. So in a way we can say that the first understanding of time was actually not linear but circular, because even the hunter-gatherers from the beginnings of humanity used to be so much dependent on the time of the year and on the time of the day as well. However, this view was later reintroduced by numerous other thinkers, the most notable among which was Friedrich Nietzsche, who introduced the concept of eternal return, which is a hypothetical statement that time may go in a loop. In his book The Gay Science, he says, "What if some day or night a demon were to steal into your loneliness and say to you, 'This life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once again and innumerable times again. There will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything unspeakably small or great in your life must return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Even this spider and this moonlight between the trees and even this moment and I myself, the eternal hourglass of existence, is turned over and over again, and you with it, speck of dust.' Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus?" So for Nietzsche, the mere possibility of time going in circles is a nightmare, because in that case human beings become essentially trapped inside their own lives. Nietzsche was dealing, however, with the implication of circular time, not with its cause. Jorge Luis Borges, on the other hand, attempted to figure out on what grounds eternal return could even be possible. In his essay The Circular Time, he speaks about 3 ways in which we can say that time can be seen as circular. The first has to do with astrology. Borges says that if we assume that the position of the stars and the planets directly influences what happens on Earth, then 2 moments when the stars and planets are located in identical positions would result in 2 identical moments on Earth. Borges, however, seems to be skeptical about it and instead moves on to more scientific grounds. In his second point, he says that even though time is infinite, matter is not. So given the finite matter and infinite time for this matter to permutate itself in the universe, in some gazillions of years, matter would necessarily get into the same position as it has once already been. The third way in which time can be circular, according to Borges, has to do with a simpler explanation. He says that, in principle, the experiences of all the people on the planet are not unique. We live through very similar feelings of love, pain, agony, depression, joy, etc., and all these feelings repeat at different times all throughout our lives. So in principle, we do have to go in circles because of that. Borges writes, "It becomes no more than an affirmation that the number of human perceptions, emotions, thoughts and vicissitudes is limited, and that before dying we will exhaust them all." Marcus Aurelius repeats, "To see the things of the present moment is to see all that is now, all that has been since time began, and all that shall be unto the world's end, for all things are of one kind and one form." Speaking about Borges, one thing that he is known for is his fascination with all kinds of labyrinths. In his short story The Garden of Forking Paths, he wonders, however, what if a labyrinth is not only a structure that is built in space, but also a structure that unrolls in time. To explain this, Borges uses his favorite literary device, writing a story about a made-up book. The book, allegedly written by Chinese, was an attempt to create a literal garden of forking paths, that is, a work that would allow infinitely many alternative storylines. Borges writes, "In all fiction, when a man is faced with alternatives, he chooses one at the expense of the others. In the almost unfathomable V-VII, he chooses simultaneously all of them. He thus creates various futures, various times, which start others that will in their turn branch out and bifurcate in other times. This is the cause of the contradictions in the novel. Fang, let us say, has a secret. A stranger knocks at his door. Fang makes up his mind to kill him. Naturally, there are various possible outcomes. Fang can kill the intruder can kill Fang, both can be saved, both can die, and so on and so on. In V-VII's work, all the possible solutions occur, each one being the point of departure for other bifurcations. And as always, Borges implies that it's not just about that novel. The novel is just one possible metaphor for how the world could actually operate. That is, it could operate by being labyrinthine in time, and in this way, Borges manages to prefigure the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, in addition to the appearance of interactive fiction and computer games that allow for this parallel time to unroll. Another example of time that is somehow subverted is warp time, which is time that allows time traveling.
2015! 2015? You mean we're in the future?
One of the first and most important examples of this in literature is The Time Machine by Herbert George Wells, where the protagonist, as you can understand from the title, finds a time machine that gets him into some very distant future. And that future turns out to be quite dystopian. By that time, humanity has split into two species, the Eloi, small childlike humans that live in comfort on the surface, and the Morlocks, the disgusting and evil humans that live underground because they are afraid of daylight, but also do all the dirty work to support the Eloi. The two species are in constant struggle, and it appears that the Morlocks are actually more capable of surviving in some even more remote future. In this novel, just as in many other novels that feature time traveling, the author tries to expand on a tendency that he finds in his present life, which in this case is the rising gap between the working class and the bourgeoisie. On the other hand, time traveling literature is rather easily affected by the dominant ideologies of the time, so in the case of The Time Machine, you can clearly see how much it is influenced by Marxism and the Marxist view on the future of capitalism. So to sum up, warp time that allows for guessing what would happen in a completely different time is not really about that other time, but it's rather all about the present, about the time when the author lives in, and about the thoughts that people have at that time. An extreme example of time subversion is the case when time is completely absent as a mental concept. This, for example, happens in the novel Slaughterhouse-Five by Vonnegut, where there is a fictional planet, Trollfemador. The inhabitants of the planet Trollfemador are of a peculiar kind. They don't have legs, nor ears, not even heads, they only have one arm, one eye on that arm, and the arm itself is a toilet plunger. But their appearance is not the only peculiarity they have. The other one is that the Trollfemadorians can see through time, or despite time, as if time didn't exist in the way it exists for us humans. For example, when they look into the sky, they don't see a bunch of sparks on it, but instead they see luminous spaghetti of the paths that stars take all throughout their lifetime. The Trollfemadorians see everything else in the exact same way. For them, everything is devoid of its defined temporal position, everything is located in all the places where it has or will ever be. For Vonnegut, the Trollfemadorians are a way to reflect on how cognition works, on how we perceive time, and a way to imagine how we could see the world if time didn't exist at all. And the last way to subvert time is something that is quite hard to define. It happens when time indeed rolls on, but there is always something keeping it behind and not letting it go linearly into the future. Time can be complicated for numerous reasons, but in this video I'd like to outline three of them: complication by memory, by space, and by language. Complication by memory is really simple. When you remember an event in your mind, you kind of exist not only where you're physically located, but also you mentally transfer transport yourself into the time of the event. This becomes a big topic in modernist literature, with the notable example of Marcel Proust's main character trying a cookie that he'd eaten in his childhood and mentally reliving part of that childhood. Complication by space works in a similar way, because for us human beings, space and spatial structures such as buildings, cities, rivers, etc. do not only exist objectively as a fact of the universe. For us they also exist symbolically. We provide places with meaning, which is often the meaning that binds the place to a certain time, a time of an event, or a time when we visited the place. So whenever we come to that place, it invokes in us an association with the time past, with the time that for us is associated with that place. One example of this we can find in the novel Austerlitz by Winfried Georg Sebald, where the main character comes to a place and that immediately sparks remembrance inside of him. I went out on the platform to photograph the capital of a cast iron column which had touched some chord of recognition in me. What made me uneasy at the sight of it, however, was not the question whether the complex form of the capital, now covered with a puce-tinged incrustation, had really impressed itself on my mind when I passed through Pilsen with a children's transport in the summer of 1939, but the idea, ridiculous in itself, that this cast iron column, which with its scaly surface seemed almost to approach the nature of a living being, might remember me and was, if I may so put it, said Austerlitz, a witness to what I could no longer recollect for myself. So what Sebald is trying to say is that places remember our lives because we remember our lives in those places, so that life and space become tied together, not letting time go by. A similar yet different reason for time subversion is language, because language as a traditional tool of communication that has been forming for centuries and even millennia always keeps you back in that tradition. A prime example of that was given by the Ukrainian writer Mykola Khvylovy, who in his short story Ivan Ivanovich was trying to ironize the Marxist intention to completely break with the past and the tradition. Let's have a look at this masterpiece of a quote. It was getting dark, church bells were ringing, and their sound might disturb the soul of every citizen. And ordinary citizens thought, of course, of Christ's resurrection, not so Ivan Ivanovich. He tried to force himself to think of anti-religious propaganda. How grateful he would be if the factory sirens could be heard now, then his soul, pardon me, this inexcusable idealism, not his soul, but perhaps something else, something more monistic, would indeed be stirred. He would not think then about the primitive Christian commune, but about materialist dialectics. In this quote, Khvylovy shows that although Ivan Ivanovich, being a radical communist, wants to break with his nation's religious past, he could not do so because language keeps him behind. For example, he uses expressions like stir someone's soul that didn't fit into the atheist ideology of the USSR because there could be no souls. Expressions like that inscribe the dualistic beliefs of Christians into language itself, thus not letting time go by into the future without regard to what happened in the past. So to conclude our overview of ways in which time can go wrong, I'll agree with St. Augustine. Before this video I'd been completely sure what the deal with time was, but now that you ask, I don't think I know that any longer. Do you know? Maybe I missed something. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Meanwhile, I'll go and check what the time is.